Fan Appreciation Week, and this is Cover Killer Nation's favorite albums. And since it is Fan Appreciation Week, that means that the theme has been determined by one of the members of the Cover Killer Nation, and that man is Tom De Silva, who wondered what some of my favorite black metal albums are. I'm going to preface this by telling you that if there is one style or genre of metal that I don't have very much of in my collection, there's a very good chance that black metal is probably one of those genres, or is that genre where I may have the least. Power metal will probably rank right next door. Not necessarily due to a distaste for either of them, but mainly based around the fact that I just have never really explored too deeply or too densely into both of those genres, although I have certainly done so a lot more often in the past couple of years while reviewing here on this channel. So based around that, some of my picks may seem a bit typical, either that or may seem a bit fringe line, almost as though I'm grasping at straws, but there are 5 of them that I want to talk about very briefly in this edition. We're going to kind of go away with all of the fancy editing on this one, so the list is going to be down below in the description box. I want to start from some of the very inception points of black metal, which actually has its roots all the way back in the 1980s, and move forward to the present. One of the very first albums that I ever listened to that was kind of this persuasion, but actually nowadays, whenever you talk about it, more people lean toward the guise of Viking metal, is Blood, Fire, Death by Bathory. A lot of you guys have been wanting me to talk about this band for a very, very long time, and obviously it's not going to happen with a new album review, all things considered, so we're definitely going to have to talk about their back catalog at some point in time because it's largely influential. However, Blood, Fire, Death was a couple of albums into the band's career, and it was one that definitely embodied more of the extreme metal genre early on before kind of going into more of this element of what people would consider to be Viking metal. And Bathory is hugely influential to not only the black metal scene in general, but to heavy metal in general, as a lot of people can definitely trace back a lot of some of their early lineages to either the band itself, either that or bands that got together and really formulated a lot of their sound based around Bathory. I like this album because it combines epic sounding, long constructions with a little bit shorter, a little bit more standard tracks, and it really showcased that even back then, even whenever this album was released, this was a concept that was not going to be a foreign one to heavy metal. It was going to be one that metal actually embraced. Love the sound on this album. You can definitely hear the transition to from the black metal sound or the extreme metal sound to one that was going to be a little bit more themed, and I really love the guitar work on here. The guitar work is absolutely one of a kind on this album, and it's otherworldly, which is the reason why it's seen as so highly influential to so many different individuals, especially within the earliest roots of the second wave of black metal. Also, whenever you speak about some of the early foundation points, you have to talk about Scorn Defeat by Sigh. Yeah, Sigh, the same band that a lot of people associate these days with more of an avant-garde or a progressive sound, actually started off and had roots in the extreme metal scenes of death metal and even black metal. This is an album that definitely showcases that in an extremely unique style, adapting their unique take on the genre. This is a group that was from afar in contact with many of the members of the classic Norwegian black metal scene from the early parts of the 1990s. So we're talking, of course, names such as Euronymous and Varg Vikernes. So this is a band that definitely kept that correspondence, which actually led to their records being distributed in a different part of the world, considering they themselves hail from Japan. So this group uses their unique take in a very raw style on this album, might I add, to really add a bit of a Far Eastern charm to the idea of black metal, but definitely has the same sound, that same resemblance to the classic Norwegian style, only with some of its own liberties being taken. If you're a fan of Sigh or have listened to just a couple of their albums, like Imaginary Soundscapes or any of the albums that have followed, take a trip all the way back to the first portion of the 1990s and see where this band can really trace some of their roots with Scorn Defeat. This is one that really took me by surprise whenever I listened to it for the first time, which was actually only a couple of weeks ago, and it quickly became one of my favorites. It's one that's definitely been on repeat for quite some time. The third one that I talk about, we actually shift forward in time. We kind of ignore all of the classic Norwegian stuff because, let's face it, A Blaze in the Northern Sky and, the works from Burzum, Battles in the North by Immortal, and some of the other trademark classics of the black metal scene have really been reviewed and kind of done to death. That's all kind of stuff that's a bit, typical for one, and if you're into black metal in the slightest iota, you know these albums and you know of the mystique that really traverses surrounding them. However, one of those bands, Emperor, released a very different album with their last official release with Prometheius, The Discipline of Fire, and Demise. I love this album because you could see that Emperor, out of all of these groups, was going to be the one that was going to evolve the most and really transition themselves into something even greater than what they were whenever they first got started. It was something where their constructions already had a very unique tone to it. Whenever you listen to albums such as Nine Equilibrium, you can sort of see some resemblances to like Storm of the Light's Bane by Dissection, and it's something that's very typical for the time, but nonetheless extremely influential. But then you listen to Prometheius and you notice that this was a group that was going to be moving on to really bigger and better things, and you could tell that if they weren't going to be able to keep the band together, which they weren't able to, their solo projects, their unique sides and unique takes on music were really going to dominate the next decade, which is something that we saw with groups such as Great Incarnation. A couple years after this album was released, Prometheius, that is, we got Light of Day, Day of Darkness by Great Incarnation. So we have a lot. There's a lot of history that sort of follows this group post Prometheius. I love the unique sound, I love the unique take, and it's just a wonderful album. It's just a wonderful album. Thorns on My Grave is an amazing song. You need to check this one out. Then we get to the middle of the 2000s, and we get to a point where we're starting to see a lot of different changes in black metal. We're starting to see a lot of different subgenres that are sort of starting to pop up a little bit. You're starting to see melodic black metal. You're starting to see bands such as Naglfar really kind of take control of their own destiny a little bit and kind of move toward melodic death metal within the black metal stylings, or blackened death metal. We see the Akercockies of the world and things like that. But I look at Blackdoor Miracle by Ragnarok from 2004, I believe, as just a real classic callback to the days of old whenever it comes to black metal, whenever it comes to that initial Norwegian scene. This is just a beast of an album. It's one that's got all of the evil that you could potentially digest in one sitting and then just somehow poops out more. It's just an absolutely fantastic, phenomenal disc. I remember whenever this came out, a lot of people were hailing it to be kind of the new classic in black metal, and that really is a reputation that has not followed this album as we've traversed the years. But the more that I listened to it back then, 11 years ago, and really moving up and forward toward today, the more I think that it actually has more importance than a lot of people think. I think that those folks that were calling it a modern classic were not all of that far off. It's just a legend that was not attached to anything, whereas with some of the other black metal legendary albums, there is a legend that's attached to it, and not always musically based. This album's just a mammoth, and I really enjoy it. I think that this is a group that's exceptionally underrated within the scene, and one that definitely needs a little bit more attention. And then we move up to the present. Then we move up to just a couple of years ago. We move into a band that had an underground reputation, but really broke through and crossed over into a lot more people's living rooms with their release Lawless Darkness. We have Watain. This group was one that made such a profound impression whenever this album came out that the minute I found out that they were going to be doing a leg of their tour right around this area, in the Pittsburgh area, I knew that I had to go. I didn't care what I had to do. I didn't care if I had to brave a snowstorm, which I'd already done once at that stage of the game whenever I saw Immortal and Absu, and that was a fun experience, so fuck it. Who the hell cares? It was a show that I believe also featured Triptychon, if I remember correctly, and that's just a hell of a two-band lineup right there, son of a bitch. But Lawless Darkness really took everything that Watain had been providing to the world for a number of years and gave it more depth, gave it more density and just provided a little bit more songwriting liberation and freedom, which we saw happen a lot more within the follow-up that came just a couple of years afterward. This is something that showcased that Watain as a group was going to be evolving and was going to be growing, but was still not going to be completely devolving their sinister charm away from their sound. It was one that was actually magnified. Lawless Darkness is very similar to its cover, the way it kind of encircles you and feels like it's drawing you into a portal of just death and destruction. And it's a beautiful way to describe the album, considering it's one that you can go back to countless times, effortlessly, and feel as though you're never going to get bored with it. So Tom, I know that it doesn't have all the fancy bells and whistles of some of the other episodes, but I hope that this was one that provided at least a couple of my favorite black metal albums, and this is going to be an element that I'm going to be revisiting in the future, so you've definitely started something. I thank you for that. And for all of the rest of you, I hope that you're enjoying Fan Appreciation Week. If I don't get to your selection whenever Fan Appreciation Week concludes, it's not because I don't like you, it's just because there's a lot of them, and my time is, well, it's limited. So keep on bringing in some more suggestions. We'll see if we can get to some in this week and outside of this week. But for now, this has been Cover Killer Nation's favorite albums, and you're my favorite fans. Big fucking black metal hug. That is impossible.